Welcome to this journey through one of the most disturbing cases recorded in the history of Mississippi. Before we begin, I invite you to leave in the comments where you're watching from and the exact time you're listening to this narration. We're interested in knowing which places and what times of day or night these documented stories reach. The year was 1844, and the heat of the Mississippi summer pressed down like a weighted blanket on the sprawling cotton fields of Willow Creek. Located some 20 miles east of Natchez, this small farming community had flourished in the decades following Mississippi's statehood, its prosperity built upon the backs of those who had no choice in the matter. Among the larger plantations that dominated the landscape was Webb Manor, owned by Josiah Webb, a third-generation farmer whose grandfather had claimed the land when it was still territory. Josiah Webb was not known for cruelty, at least not by the standards of men like him in those days. The records from the First Baptist Church of Natchez, where he occasionally attended Sunday service, described him as a man of means and moderate temperament, yet those who worked his fields might have used different words entirely. The plantation ledgers recovered from county archives show that Webb owned 47 enslaved persons in 1844, a number that had grown steadily since he inherited the property from his father some 12 years earlier. It was during the cotton harvest of that year when the events began that would eventually be documented in private correspondence between Webb and his brother-in-law, a circuit judge in Jackson. These letters, discovered in 1965 during renovations to the Adams County Courthouse, paint a picture of a man gradually descending into a state that can only be described as paranoid terror. According to the first letter, dated September 3, 1844, Webb had recently purchased several enslaved people from a plantation that had fallen into debt after the Panic of 1837. Among them was a man estimated to be in his 60s, whose name was recorded only as Solomon in the bill of sale preserved in county records. What made this man remarkable and what would eventually draw Webb's attention was not immediately apparent. The harvest that year had been particularly bountiful. The weather had cooperated perfectly, enough rain in the spring, hot summer days that stretched long into the evening, and the promise of a dry autumn for picking. Webb anticipated a profit that would allow him to expand his holdings further west. His mood, by all accounts, was jovial during those early September days. The neighboring plantation owners who dined with him noted nothing unusual, according to their own journals and correspondence from the time. It was during one of his routine inspections of the fields that Webb first encountered Solomon performing what would later be described as unusual activities. The old man, whose hands were gnarled from decades of cotton picking, had been sitting beneath a sycamore tree during the brief midday rest period. What caught Webb's attention was not that Solomon was resting. This was permitted, but that several younger workers had gathered around him in a semicircle, each handing him something small that Webb couldn't initially identify. As Webb approached, the group dispersed quickly, returning to their water gourds or their small portions of cornbread. Only Solomon remained seated, his eyes downcast as the plantation owner's shadow fell across him. In Webb's own words from his letter, I demanded to know what business was being conducted under my tree on my time. Solomon's response was documented as being delivered in a voice as dry as cotton ready for picking. Reading fortunes, Master Webb, for just 1 penny. Webb's reaction, as he later recorded it, was to laugh. The idea that anyone would part with their meager possessions for something as worthless as a fortune struck him as absurd. More absurd still was the notion that someone in Solomon's position would presume to know anything about the future. I'll give you one better, Webb reportedly told him. I'll give you a whole $1 if you can read my fortune. This was, of course, an impossible sum for someone in Solomon's position, the equivalent of weeks of extra provisions. What happened next has been recorded in multiple sources, not just Webb's increasingly disturbed letters, but also in the diary of Eliza Webb, his wife, whose private writings were discovered hidden in a compartment of her writing desk when the plantation house was being prepared for historical preservation in 1959. Solomon looked up for the first time, meeting Webb's gaze directly, an action that would normally have resulted in severe punishment. But something in the old man's eyes gave Webb pause, as he later wrote. "Tell me what you hold most dear," Solomon said, according to Webb's account. Webb, still treating the entire interaction as a form of amusement, replied that what he held most dear was his tobacco, a new pipe having just arrived from New Orleans. Solomon nodded once, closed his eyes, and began to speak in a monotone voice. "Before the moon is full again, what you hold most dear will turn to ash. Before the harvest is complete, your fields will run red. Before winter comes, you will bury what you love, and before the year turns, you yourself will know the taste of chains." Webb described his reaction as uproarious laughter, tossing a silver dollar into the dust at Solomon's feet before returning to the main house for lunch. He thought little of the encounter for the remainder of the day, dismissing it as the ramblings of an old man trying to frighten him into better treatment or additional rations. The sun set on Willow Creek, and all continued as normal. 3 nights later, Webb was enjoying his evening pipe on the veranda of the main house. The full moon had risen, casting long shadows across the manicured lawn. According to Eliza's diary, Webb had just commented on the quality of the new tobacco when a commotion erupted from the direction of the stables. A lantern had been knocked over, and flames were already consuming the dry hay stored there. The tobacco pouch, left forgotten on the railing, was caught by a sudden gust of wind and carried directly into the growing blaze. The fire was eventually contained, but not before it had destroyed the stables, 2 horses, and all of Webb's prized tobacco. As he stood watching the embers cool in the moonlight, Webb recalled the first part of Solomon's prediction. "Before the moon is full again, what you hold most dear will turn to ash." The silver dollar suddenly felt heavy in his pocket, a feeling he would describe in detail to his brother-in-law. Webb might have dismissed this as coincidence had it not been for what happened next. As the cotton harvest progressed, tension began to build among the overseers. An unusually high number of snakes had been discovered in the fields that year, water moccasins and copperheads that normally kept to the creek beds and woods. 3 field workers had been bitten in the span of a week, though none fatally. Then came the day when William Harding, Webb's head overseer for nearly a decade, stepped on a cottonmouth hidden beneath a fallen cotton boll. The records from Dr. Samuel Whitmore, the physician called from Natchez to attend to Harding, note that the overseer received multiple bites to his leg before he could retreat. Despite the doctor's efforts, gangrene set in rapidly. The medical technology of 1844 was limited, and amputation was the only recourse. The procedure was performed in one of the outbuildings, which still stands today as part of the historical site. Harding did not survive. The blood from the procedure soaked through the floorboards and into the soil beneath. Heavy rains followed, washing the blood across the yard and into the edge of the cotton fields. When Webb saw the reddish water running between the rows of cotton plants, Solomon's second prediction echoed in his mind. "Before the harvest is complete, your fields will run red." It was at this point that Webb's correspondence takes on a more frantic tone. He began to avoid Solomon in the fields, instructing the new overseer to assign the elderly man to tasks that kept him far from the main house. Webb's sleep became troubled. Eliza noted in her diary that he would wake in the night, convinced someone was standing at the foot of their bed. During the day, he was irritable and distracted, particularly when any mention was made of the upcoming winter. By all accounts, Webb had always been a devoted family man. Historical records indicate he had 3 children, Thomas, age 17, Catherine, age 14, and the youngest, Sarah, age 8. Sarah, according to multiple sources including church records and private correspondence between Eliza and her sister, had always been a frail child. Born prematurely during a difficult delivery, she had suffered from various respiratory ailments throughout her short life. As October gave way to November and the last of the cotton was brought in from the fields, Sarah's condition worsened. What began as a simple cold quickly developed into pneumonia, a common and frequently fatal illness in the 19th century, particularly for those with already compromised health. Dr. Whitmore was called again, this time to the main house, but his treatments, standard for the era, consisted mainly of bloodletting and various herbal concoctions that likely did more harm than good. Sarah Webb died on November 20th, 1844, as the first cold front of the approaching winter moved through Mississippi. She was buried in the small family cemetery on a hill overlooking Willow Creek, where her gravestone can still be seen today, weather-worn but legible. The third prediction had come to pass. Before winter comes, you will bury what you love. Webb's mental state deteriorated rapidly following Sarah's death. His letters to his brother-in-law became more disjointed, filled with references to being watched and followed. He became convinced that Solomon was somehow responsible for these tragedies, not merely predicting them, but causing them through some unknown means. The rational part of Webb's mind must have known this was impossible, but grief and fear had taken a firm hold. In early December, Webb ordered Solomon to be confined to the small jail building that existed on most large plantations of the era. This structure, essentially a reinforced shed with iron fixtures for restraints, was typically used for severe punishments or to hold enslaved people who were considered flight risks. According to plantation records, Solomon spent 11 days there without cause being documented, unusual for Webb, who typically kept meticulous records of disciplinary actions. What happened on the 12th night has been pieced together from multiple sources. Webb's final letter to his brother-in-law, Eliza's diary, and a sworn statement by James Wilson, a neighboring plantation owner who was called to Webb Manor in the middle of the night. It appears that Webb, consumed by the fear of Solomon's final prediction, "Before the year turns, you yourself will know the taste of chains," decided to confront the old man directly. Armed with a pistol, Webb entered the jail building shortly after midnight. What was said between the two men has never been recorded. Approximately 20 minutes later, a single gunshot was heard. When the overseer arrived with a lantern, he found Webb standing in the corner of the cell, the pistol on the floor, and Solomon still shackled but unharmed. Webb was described as being in a catatonic state, not responding to questions or commands. Wilson, upon his arrival, noted in his statement that Webb appeared to have lost his senses entirely. The plantation owner was brought back to the main house and confined to his bedroom, while a messenger was sent to Jackson to fetch Webb's brother-in-law, Judge Carlton Harris. By the time Harris arrived 3 days later, Webb's condition had not improved. He would neither speak nor eat, and appeared not to recognize his wife or remaining children. On the advice of Dr. Whitmore and with the legal authority of Judge Harris, Josiah Webb was transported to the Mississippi State Lunatic Asylum in Jackson, which had opened just a few years earlier in 1842. The admission records preserved in state archives list his condition as acute melancholia with features of paranoia and catatonia. In accordance with the medical practices of the time, Webb was indeed restrained with iron manacles during his transport and initial confinement, the chains that Solomon had predicted he would taste. Webb remained at the asylum until his death in 1846. The cause was listed as brain fever, a common diagnosis of the era that could encompass everything from encephalitis to mental breakdown. Eliza never remarried, continuing to run Webb Manor with the help of her son Thomas until her death in 1865, just as the Civil War was ending and reshaping the world that had allowed plantations like Webb Manor to exist. As for Solomon, the historical record becomes murky. His name appears on an inventory of Webb's estate conducted after Josiah was institutionalized, but disappears from subsequent records. Some sources suggest he may have been among those sold to cover Webb's mounting debts, while others indicate he may have escaped during the confusion following Webb's removal to the asylum. A tantalizing clue appears in an 1850 account from a riverboat captain who transported escaped enslaved people along the Mississippi as part of the Underground Railroad. He mentions an elderly man who could see what was yet to come and who had used this ability to secure his own freedom. Whether this was the same Solomon is impossible to verify. The ruins of Webb Manor still stand today, though the main house was largely destroyed by fire during the Civil War. The family cemetery remains, as does the foundation of the small jail building where the final confrontation between Webb and Solomon took place. Local historical accounts suggest that unusual events continue to occur on the property. Visitors have reported sudden changes in temperature, particularly near the jail foundation, and some claim to have heard a voice offering to read their fortune for just a penny. In 1962, during the height of the civil rights movement, a group of researchers from Tougaloo College attempted to document the oral histories of descendants of those formerly enslaved at plantations throughout Mississippi. During their work in Adams County, they encountered an elderly woman who claimed her great-grandfather had been enslaved at Webb Manor. When asked if she knew any stories about the plantation, she recounted a version of Solomon's predictions that aligned remarkably well with the documentary evidence, despite having no access to Webb's letters or Eliza's diary, which were not made public until years later. When pressed about how she knew these details, the woman said only that, in her family, certain gifts were passed down through generations. "Some can see what's coming," she told the researchers, "and some can make what's coming happen." The interview notes indicate she then offered to read the fortune of the lead researcher for the price of $1. The researcher declined, perhaps wisely. The Tougaloo College researchers' reluctance to engage with the elderly woman's offer seems understandable when one considers the pattern established a century earlier. But their academic curiosity eventually overcame their caution. According to notes filed with their research materials, documents that remained sealed until 1968 due to the lead researcher's explicit instructions, they did return to interview the woman a second time. Her name was Clara Johnson, then 76 years old, living in a small house on the outskirts of Natchez. The weathered structure stood on land that had once been part of a property adjacent to Webb Manor. When the researchers arrived, they found her sitting on a porch swing, seemingly expecting them. The field notes describe her as remarkably lucid and precise in her recollections for someone of her advanced age. During this second interview, Ms. Johnson revealed that Solomon had not perished at Webb Manor or been sold off during the estate liquidation. According to family oral history passed down through 4 generations, Solomon had indeed escaped during the chaos following Webb's breakdown. But rather than fleeing north like many others seeking freedom, Solomon had remained in the area, living in secrecy in a community of free black people and escaped enslaved persons that existed in the dense forests between plantation properties. He could have gone, Ms. Johnson told the researchers, but he had unfinished business. There were others whose fates needed reading. The researchers, maintaining scholarly skepticism, asked how Solomon could have survived when patrols regularly hunted for escaped enslaved people. Ms. Johnson's answer was recorded verbatim. "Those who can see what's coming can also see who's coming. No patrol ever found him because he always knew when they were approaching. And those they sent looking would find themselves turned around. ending up back where they started, confused and frightened by sounds they couldn't identify. What makes this account particularly intriguing is that county records do indeed show an unusual number of patrol reports from the area surrounding Webb Manor between 1845 and 1850. These reports frequently mention disorientation, circular paths, and unsettling phenomena that caused the patrols to abandon their searches. Historians have typically attributed these accounts to the difficult terrain and the psychological effects of the dense Mississippi forests on men already primed to fear encountering resistance from those they pursued. Solomon, according to Ms. Johnson's family history, lived until 1863, dying just months before the Emancipation Proclamation would have granted him the legal freedom he had already claimed for himself. He was reportedly buried in an unmarked grave in what was then referred to as the Colored Cemetery outside Natchez. Archaeological surveys conducted in 1966 confirmed the existence of this burial ground, though individual graves could not be identified due to the absence of markers. Before his death, Solomon allegedly passed his gift to his granddaughter, Ms. Johnson's mother, though with a solemn warning, "The seeing comes at a price. Use it rarely, and never for your own gain." This caution had been respected through the generations, with the ability used primarily to protect family and community members from harm. The lead researcher, Dr. Marcus Thompson, initially maintained his professional distance from these claims, yet his private journal, donated to the Tougaloo College archives after his death in 1981, tells a different story. On the final day of their interviews with Ms. Johnson, as the team was preparing to leave, she took Dr. Thompson aside. "You've been carrying that pain for a long time," she reportedly told him, though he had shared nothing of his personal life during their professional interactions. "Before the leaves fall, you'll receive a letter. What was lost will be found, though not in the form you expect." Dr. Thompson noted in his journal that he dismissed this at the time as the ramblings of an elderly woman who had perhaps become too invested in her family mythology. He had indeed suffered a personal loss. His younger brother had disappeared during a camping trip in Tennessee some 7 years earlier. His body never recovered, despite extensive searches. But this information was not publicly known, and certainly had not been shared during the research trip. On October 28, 1962, as the trees around Tougaloo College were shedding their autumn foliage, Dr. Thompson received a letter postmarked from a small town in Oregon. Inside was a photograph of his brother, visibly older than when he had disappeared, standing in front of a small cabin in a heavily wooded area. The brief note explained that after suffering a head injury and subsequent amnesia during his camping trip, the brother had wandered extensively before establishing a new life on the West Coast, with only fragments of his former identity occasionally surfacing. A recent newspaper article about Dr. Thompson's research had triggered more substantial memories, leading to the contact. This personal experience appears to have profoundly affected Dr. Thompson's approach to the Webb-Solomon case. His subsequent papers, while maintaining scholarly rigor in their analysis of historical documents and oral histories, demonstrate a more nuanced perspective on the intersections of prediction, perception, and historical causality. His final publication before his retirement, Voices from the Shadows, Untold Narratives of Resistance in Antebellum Mississippi, includes a chapter dedicated to what he termed knowledge systems beyond Western rationalism that preserved and empowered marginalized communities. The Webb family line continued through Thomas, who managed to rebuild some of the family fortune after the Civil War, though on a much smaller scale and without enslaved labor. The family papers include occasional references to grandfather's madness and the curse of Webb Manor, suggesting that the story of Solomon's predictions remained part of the family's private mythology. Catherine Webb, who married into the prominent Anderson family of Jackson, reportedly refused to ever return to Webb Manor after her father's institutionalization, claiming that the walls remembered too much. In 1876, Thomas Webb's eldest son, James, attempted to rebuild on the original plantation site, constructing a more modest home near the ruins of the original manor house. Construction was abandoned after a series of accidents, including the collapse of a scaffold that resulted in the death of 2 workers. Local newspapers from the time attributed these incidents to the poor condition of materials salvaged from the original structure, but private correspondence between James and his mother reveals a deeper anxiety. "There is something in the soil here that rejects our presence," he wrote. Perhaps father was right to fear this place. The land remained in Webb family hands, but largely unused until 1921, when Richard Webb, great-grandson of Josiah, donated it to the state of Mississippi for the creation of a historical preservation area. The donation came with specific conditions. The ruins were to be maintained but not restored. The family cemetery was to receive perpetual care, and most unusually, no construction was to take place within 100 yards of the foundation of the former jail building. This last condition has been the subject of considerable speculation among both historians and those interested in paranormal phenomena. Richard Webb left no explicit explanation for this requirement, though a letter to his wife, discovered among his personal effects after his death in 1938, offers a possible insight. "I have visited the old property against your better judgment and my own comfort. I stood where great-grandfather's life unraveled and felt observed, not by human eyes, understand, but by something that has waited patiently in that spot for decades. Whatever bargain was struck there remains in force, and I will not be the one to disturb it. During the civil rights era, as researchers like those from Tougaloo College began to more systematically document and center the experiences of enslaved people and their descendants, the Webb-Solomon story attracted renewed interest. This attention was intensified by a series of incidents at the historical site that defied conventional explanation. In 1964, a night watchman at the preservation area reported hearing the sound of chains being dragged across wooden floorboards near the jail foundation, though the structure itself had long since disappeared, leaving only the stone foundation. The watchman, a local man named Henry Davis, with no prior knowledge of the Webb-Solomon story, resigned the following day. When pressed for details by the site manager, Davis would only say, "Some things ain't meant to be guarded, and some places don't want company after dark." The following year, a graduate student conducting research for a dissertation on architectural history spent several days taking measurements and photographs at the site. Among the hundreds of images he captured was one of the jail foundation that, when developed, appeared to show a dark figure seated in what would have been the center of the structure. Photography experts who examined the negative could find no evidence of double exposure or other technical explanations for the anomaly. The student, whose academic career later took him far from Mississippi and the study of Southern plantation architecture, refused all requests to discuss the photograph or his experiences at Webb Manor. Perhaps most compelling was the experience of Diane Carter, a descendant of enslaved people from a neighboring plantation, who visited the site in 1967 as part of a personal genealogical research project. According to her written account, filed with the Historical Society that now maintains the site's records, she felt drawn to the jail foundation despite having no prior knowledge of its significance. "As I approached the stone outline," she wrote, "the air grew noticeably colder, though it was July in Mississippi. I heard what sounded like someone humming a spiritual my grandmother used to sing, 'Steal Away.' When I looked up, expecting to see another visitor, there was no one visible on the grounds, yet I had the distinct impression of being watched by someone who meant me no harm, but was evaluating my purpose there. A voice, barely audible but distinct, asked me, "What do you seek to know?" Before I could answer, a tour group approached, and the sensation immediately vanished. I have never experienced anything similar before or since, though I have visited many historical sites connected to plantation history. Webb Manor. Historical Preservation Area continues to draw visitors interested in antebellum architecture, Civil War history, and the darker aspects of the plantation system. The site's official guidebook makes only passing reference to local legends surrounding Josiah Webb's mental decline and the fate of those enslaved on his property. But unofficial tours, often led by local residents claiming family connections to former Webb Manor workers, offer a different narrative, one centered on Solomon's predictions and their uncanny fulfillment. The archive room at the Adams County Historical Society contains a climate-controlled case with the preserved letters between Webb and his brother-in-law alongside Eliza's recovered diary. Visitors can request to view these documents, though handling them requires special permission and the presence of an archivist. Those who have studied these primary sources often comment on the progressive deterioration of Webb's handwriting throughout his correspondence, from the confident script of a prosperous landowner to the barely legible scrawls of his final letters. Less prominently displayed, but perhaps more telling, is a small leather pouch discovered during archaeological excavations at the jail site in 1952. The pouch, believed to date from the mid-19th century, contained 3 items: a smooth river stone with unusual markings, a tarnished silver dollar dated 1844, and a folded piece of paper on which was written in a careful hand, "What is foretold is not always what is fated. The reader sees, but the listener chooses." Experts have debated whether these items could have belonged to Solomon, though no definitive connection has been established. The handwriting analysis is inconclusive, as few enslaved people of that era were literate, and fewer still left written records. Yet the silver dollar's date aligns perfectly with Webb's account of his first encounter with Solomon, raising the possibility that what was discovered was, in fact, the very dollar tossed contemptuously into the dust by a man who did not yet understand the weight of what he was being told. In 2008, during preparations for a documentary on Mississippi's plantation history, the production team arranged to interview several descendants of families connected to Webb Manor. Among them was Robert Johnson, great-grandson of Clara Johnson, who had shared Solomon's story with the Tougaloo researchers nearly 50 years earlier. Now in his 60s, Robert had pursued a career in education, serving as principal of a high school in Jackson before his retirement. When asked about family stories regarding Solomon, Robert was initially reluctant to speak on camera. After some consideration, he agreed to an audio-only interview, portions of which were included in the documentary's final cut. "My great-grandmother believed that certain gifts run in families," he explained. "Not just the ability to see what's coming, but the wisdom to know when to reveal it and when to remain silent. Solomon used his gift against his oppressor because he had no other recourse. But the gift itself isn't meant for vengeance, it's meant for protection, for guidance." The interviewer, skeptical but respectful, asked if Robert himself had inherited any such abilities. His response, after a long pause, "I've known things I shouldn't have been able to know. I've felt warnings I couldn't explain. But the strongest sense I've ever had was that some doors are better left closed, and some questions are better left unasked." This sentiment echoes throughout the documented history of the Webb-Solomon case, a recurring caution against probing too deeply into matters beyond ordinary understanding. Yet human curiosity is persistent, particularly when confronted with the possibility of foreknowledge. In 2015, a paranormal investigation team received permission to conduct an overnight study at the Webb Manor site. focusing particularly on the jail foundation area. Their equipment included audio recorders, infrared cameras, electromagnetic field detectors, and other devices commonly used in such investigations. The team's report, filed with site management and later published in a journal dedicated to paranormal research, described consistent temperature drops of 15 to 20 degrees Fahrenheit in the immediate vicinity of the foundation. Despite stable temperatures elsewhere on the grounds, more compelling were the audio recordings, which captured what appeared to be a male voice speaking at a volume just above a whisper. Audio engineers who analyzed the recordings identified 3 distinct phrases, repeated at irregular intervals throughout the night. "What do you hold dear?" "Before the year turns." And most frequently, $1 for your fate. The investigation team's lead researcher, initially enthusiastic about these findings, abruptly withdrew from public discussion of the case 3 months after the investigation. In a brief statement issued through the team's website, she explained only that personal circumstances had led her to reconsider her involvement in paranormal research. Former team members, speaking on condition of anonymity, later revealed that she had received an unexpected inheritance from a previously unknown relative, exactly as predicted by a fortune teller she had consulted as a joke shortly after the Webb Manor investigation. Perhaps most disturbing are the accounts from visitors who report being approached by an elderly black man near the jail foundation, a figure not seen by others in their group and not matching any of the site's historical interpreters or staff members. These encounters typically occur late in the afternoon, as the site is preparing to close for the day, and follow a similar pattern. The man offers to read their fate for a small sum, usually described as a single dollar. Most decline the offer, some out of skepticism, others from an instinctive unease they struggle to articulate later. Those few who have accepted report mixed experiences. Some describe receiving vague predictions that could apply to almost anyone. Others recount highly specific forecasts of job changes, relocations, or family events that subsequently occurred exactly as described. A smaller subset, those whose accounts have been collected by folklorists and paranormal researchers rather than the official site management, describe predictions of loss, illness, or other misfortunes, delivered in a dry voice, like leaves rustling. The Webb Manor Historical Preservation Area continues to operate as an educational site, offering visitors glimpses into a troubled past and the complex relationships between the enslaved and their enslavers in antebellum Mississippi. Tour guides emphasize the architectural features of the remaining structures, the agricultural practices of the era, and the broader historical context of the plantation system. The Webb-Solomon story, with its suggestions of capabilities beyond rational explanation, remains at the margins of the official narrative, acknowledged but not emphasized, present but not centered. Yet visitors continue to be drawn to the jail foundation, standing in contemplative silence on the spot where Josiah Webb reportedly encountered something that destroyed his understanding of the world and his place within it. Some leave small offerings, coins, smooth stones, or flowers, though site policy officially discourages this practice. Others simply listen, perhaps hoping to hear the voice that offered both prediction and choice, $1 for your fate. The question that lingers unanswered is whether foreknowledge is truly a gift or a burden. If Solomon could indeed see what was coming, did he create Webb's downfall or merely illuminate a path already set? If predictions can become self-fulfilling prophecies, where does responsibility lie, with the one who speaks the future or the one who hears it and believes? These questions hover like evening mist over the ruins of Webb Manor, where the past never fully recedes and the boundaries between history, memory, and myth remain permeable. Each generation that encounters this story must decide for itself what meaning to extract from it, a tale of resistance against oppression, a warning about the dangers of foreknowledge, or simply an unexplained series of events that acquired the patina of the supernatural through repeated telling. For those who study such phenomena, the Webb-Solomon case represents a particularly well-documented example of what some folklorists term retributive prophecy, predictions that serve as both warning and weapon. The historical record provides unusually strong evidence for the accuracy of Solomon's predictions, while the continuing reports of unusual experiences at the site suggest that whatever began in 1844 has not yet fully concluded. Visitors to the Webb Manor site today will find a place both beautiful and unsettling. Ancient oak trees draped with Spanish moss, crumbling brick foundations reclaimed by creeping vines, the small family cemetery with its weathered headstones, including the tiny marker for Sarah Webb. The official tour concludes at sunset, as visitors are gently but firmly directed toward the parking area. No overnight access is permitted, despite frequent requests from paranormal enthusiasts and historical researchers. The final stop on the tour is typically the visitor center, where artifacts from archaeological excavations are displayed alongside contextual information about plantation life. In a small case near the exit, easily overlooked by those eager to depart, sits a single silver dollar dated 1844. Its surface is worn smooth in places, as though it passed through many hands before coming to rest here. The accompanying text identifies it only as currency, mid-19th century, recovered from site excavation. Most visitors pass by without a second glance, but occasionally someone will pause, studying the coin with unusual intensity. Staff members have learned to recognize these visitors. They're the ones who linger until closing, who ask about access to the jail foundation area, who seem to be listening for something beyond the guide's rehearsed narrative. To these visitors, the guides now offer a gentle but firm caution. Whatever you're seeking here, be certain you're prepared to find it. Some questions, once asked, cannot be unasked. Some knowledge, once gained, cannot be surrendered. Whether this warning is standard policy or an unofficial tradition passed between site employees remains unclear. What is certain is that the Webb Manor Historical Preservation Area continues to attract those interested in both history and mystery, drawn by the tantalizing possibility that sometimes the past reaches forward to touch the present, offering insights into what may yet come for those willing to pay the price of knowing. And sometimes, visitors report, if you stand near the jail foundation as the sun sets and the shadows lengthen across the grounds, you might hear a voice carried on the evening breeze. Dry as cotton, ready for picking, offering to read your fate for just $1. Whether you accept is, of course, entirely your choice. But as Josiah Webb discovered nearly 2 centuries ago, choices have consequences that extend far beyond the moment of decision. The true cost of foreknowledge may be higher than any of us are prepared to pay.